Okay, so this is the cortex. This is the cortex cerebellum, which is kind of like the coordinator of the whole nervous system. It's like the conductor of the orchestra, whereas the one who writes the music is the cortex.
Yeah, okay.
So the cerebellum is the one that essentially makes sure that all sections are coming in at the right time with the right volume and the right coordination and that kind of stuff. That's the cerebellum. The vestibular system is essentially there to detect motion, detect where you are in space. This whole structure in here, this is the brainstem. Brainstem is comprised of three parts. One is the midbrain, or the mesencephalon. One is the pons, and the other one's the medulla. Generally speaking, we can kind of divide it like this. Midbrain, or mesencephalon, is sympathetic promoting, or fight or flight promoting. Pons and medulla is parasympathetic promoting, or rest and digest promoting. Okay. Vagus nerve lives down here in the medulla. Okay, so that kind of gives you a little bit of reference.
Yeah.
Up here, you've got a few things happening. One is you've got light, we'll say light, sound, and pain modulation. Okay. Opioids work in here by improving your pain suppression. Okay, so that's why Kratom works, and that's why I forget, was it Dilaudid?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why that was working as well. And other opioids.
But so you know why it works? Because that's just pain suppressing. So how does that how does that affect my triggers or symptoms?
Yeah, so because they're all kind of connected structure-wise.
So then it's doing the light. Was it L and it's light and sound?
Light and sound.
So then it modulates. It's help modulating those because they're in the same box.
Yes, it's essentially.
Because they're wired together.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, so that's why my trigger. I'm less sensitive once I suppress it. Because if it suppresses pain, then it also suppresses the light and sound.
Yeah, yeah. It essentially suppresses the perception of stimulation as noxious stimulation.
Right.
Exactly.
Oh, wow. That's why it's working. Okay, you're the first person to answer this question.
Okay, so along with that...
Has anyone else just figured out that opioids are calming their long COVID? Am I the first to bring this to you?
No, I've heard that before.
Okay, from patients or just from
patients?
Patients have discovered that.
Yeah. They haven't gone through it themselves because it's very, very hard to get opioids.
Oh, right. Oh, so they've just read it or something?
They've just read it.
Oh, they haven't. But you haven't met anyone that's experienced it?
No.
Okay, so the hack is Kratom is as good as the Dilaudid.
Okay.
To tell you other patients.
Okay. Good to know. Now, in this midbrain, you have another cranial nerve, and a cranial nerve is essentially a nerve that comes from the brainstem. The vagus nerve is a cranial nerve.
Right.
Okay. In here, you have the nerve that deals with a lot of eye movements, like this, okay? And specifically, it's ones that draw your eyes in together.
Right.
Convergence,
right.
which is what we were doing, and you're like, oh, don't like that.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing that's really interesting, this whole thing is a very primitive part of your brain. It's very, we consider it like the reptilian brain, right? It's a very reflexive brain. That has a very strong coordination or connection with the limbic system. Have you heard of that?
Yeah, I have heard of that.
And that's essentially your emotional center, right? It assigns emotions to threats, right? There is this loop that will start to propagate on itself if that goes unchecked.
Right, okay, so that's the feedback loop.
And that's the feedback loop, right? Because you perceive a threat, and the threat is now perceived as fear and emotions and just kind of that goes back in there saying, hey, we're under threat, let's be more reflexive, more reactive. Holy shit, there's more reactivity. Holy shit, there's more threat.
Yeah, that's the feedback loop. And that's what I was telling my partner. I said somewhere in there my instinct, that's what was going on, and that's why the Kratom calms that down.
Yeah. Okay. So that is kind of to me, the main thing that is kind of standing out generally. Okay. Now, if we talk about the cortex, which is the brain, there are general concepts that like right hemisphere versus left hemisphere. Are you kind of familiar with those?
Yeah.
So right hemisphere is going to be more like big picture, big ideas, musical,
Okay.
artsy, colorful.
Right.
Left brain is going to be language. Any sort of language, anything to do with language, listening, understanding, speaking, picking the right words. Left brain is also going to be like mathematics, fine detail, list making, kind of orderly, that kind of stuff. Does that make sense? Yeah. So given that you had this word searching issue, makes me think there's a strong correlation that it could be left hemisphere that's sleepy. Now, if we just remove that eye there, the left frontal lobe is kind of the main CEO of the left side.
Okay.
Right? It has to make the final decision on what needs to happen, and that means it can regulate and suppress the left midbrain.
Okay.
Right. So remember, it's all mirrored. So there's this kind of left-right concept. This light and sound and pain is also on the left side as it is on the right side.
Okay. Yeah.
Does that kind of make sense? So if the left frontal lobe is sleepy, it can't regulate.
Regulate it.
So what I did was I used cerebellum feeding into the frontal lobe by doing these figure eights.
Yeah.
And light into the right eye because the right eye feeds over to the left brain. Just doing that plus the light, and that helped wake this up.
Right.
Wake it up so that now we can actually
start to regulate that.
Yeah.
And then hopefully lower my symptoms.
Exactly.
Oh wow. Okay. You've actually answered. I can't believe you answered that question.
Does that kind of make sense?
Oh, it makes sense, but I'm just blown away that you were able to answer it like this. I'm in the right spot place.
Cool.
Yeah. Because no one knows why the opioids are working.
Yeah, so that's my theory.
Yeah, that's a theory. But at least you've got a theory.
Yeah, so
and you were able to test it with the test that we just did. Like it was a positive result.
Yeah.
So you've got some confirmation of your theory.
There.
Is that correct?
Yeah. There. So this is the midbrain. If we were to take a slice like that,
way, okay.
and kind of like
and that's what that is there. Yeah.
Okay. So this is the light and sound nubs. It's called a superior and inferior colliculus. Okay. This is a central aqueduct. So it's something called a cerebrospinal fluid.
Yep.
Yeah, that flows in there. Okay, it bathes the spinal cord with nutrition and stuff. Around it is the periaqueductal gray, which is this pain suppression or opioid. Opioid. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay.
Opioid sensitive region.
Okay.
So that's where the opioid works, and this periaqueductal gray is your pain suppression.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
So that means that when we influence this, it'll generally influence the whole midbrain.
Yeah, the LS, those nubs.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yep.
Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, it fully makes sense. Yeah.
So, like medications are good. There's a time and a place for it, but it's not very specific. It just bathes the whole system in it, right?
Yeah.
Whereas what we're doing is very specific. Like, hey, we know that your left side is not very good.
Right.
So let's do things to improve.
To stimulate this. Okay.
The left side.
So that's what our exercises are going to be about.
Yeah.
And then do a retest to see how I respond.
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay. Now the other thing to do with your glasses, the orange lenses, if we lay out the rainbow, Roy G. Biv, right? Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. This is kind of generally, there is this concept, right hemisphere, left hemisphere. These colors will stimulate those hemispheres a little better.
Right.
Or just like a little more, it'll bias one hemisphere over the other.
Right.
So the fact that you wear orange lenses influences the left hemisphere, which will help regulate, it'll wake up the frontal lobe and occipital lobe. Right, occipital lobe is where sight essentially gets processed.
All right.
It improves that so that your frontal lobe can now be like, oh, hey, oh, I know what to do.
Right.
And it'll help regulate the midbrain.
So that's
on the
answering
left.
why the orange glasses is now helping me.
That's my theory.
That's your theory.
The other thing is also any sort of tint is going to lessen the amount of input you get.
Right.
So you could have worn sunglasses and it probably would have helped a little bit, but just not as much as the orange.
You're right, yeah. Okay, all right. So I'm
Right.
glad my sheets and all my work has really helped.
Yeah,
you
totally.
with your theories.
Yeah.
And so you now know how to dictate my exercises based on your theory?
Yeah, based on this. Let's see where things are.